welcome to Runshaw College's Teaching and Learning channel. This is a very short video just going through the 12 principles of multimedia learning as set out by Dr. Richard Mayer. Now, in the spirit of this theory, I am going to try and do the entire list of 12 principles using nothing but these 4 symbols. If I've got this right, we should be able to go through everything and get as much detail as we need using nothing but those symbols and my voice. Now, Mayer's cognitive theory of multimedia learning talks about cognitive load. Now, this is the idea that the brain actually has a working memory, and that memory can only take so much information in one go. As we impart knowledge and information to our students, that memory, that cognitive load fills up. And when it reaches its limit, it can no longer take in any more information. The information that is given simply falls by the wayside. They are already at their optimum. They cannot manage any more than that. This is the idea of working memory. As teachers, what we need to do is make sure that we are on that balancing tightrope between feeding as much information as possible and not overworking the working memory. So how do we avoid cognitive overload? Well, that is the very question that led to the 12 principles of learning that Mayer actually discusses. So you have the 12 principles right there. And from this point on, I'm going to do my very best to give a brief description of each one as far as I use it myself and how I see it in my own sessions. And I'm going to do it using nothing more than the 4 images I showed you earlier. So we'll start with coherence. This is the idea that people learn better when extraneous words, pictures, and sounds are excluded rather than included. It is not a case of throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. This means that some students are taking some information that doesn't make sense to them. Some are taking more than others as they can process information differently and quicker. What we want to do is simplify it and focus on what actually matters. So what I would say is keep your imagery on the screen or on the board and make sure that they are listening to you and what you're actually describing, the auditory sense that you're giving, is where the learning really takes place. Afterwards, you can give them the textbooks. They can go on to do further reading themselves. Signaling is a nice simple one. It is the basic idea that if there is a part of the screen or a part of the page you want them to look at, it is highlighted, it is made larger, or everything else around it has been dulled down so that you are signaling exactly where that attention should be. Redundancy is the idea of removing things that have already been covered. So in other words, if you've already got an image showing a graph with data on, then you don't also need a body of text next to that graph telling them what it says. By all means, you could maybe explain it yourself, but you don't need to have all those things at the same time. So what you're doing is you're deciding what matters. So what I would suggest, if you are going to have a graph with data on, make that the main part of the slide or the page. All you really need is a small subheading. That's the only text that they're going to have to see, and then that should be information enough for them to take on board. Spatial contiguity is just the simple idea of making sure that everything that is relevant to each other is kept together so that students aren't having to dance around the board or between pages to make those connections. We want to make it as easy as possible, so bring them together and make it obvious what goes where and what matches with what. And temporal contiguity is a similar process, only with time. Don't show a picture and then talk about it after it's gone, and certainly don't start to show text that links to data when it's not been shown at the same time. What you want to do is have your visual and auditory cues presented at the same time. That could be data, or it could be data and your own voice to explain, or it could be text with imagery to back it up, but make sure that they're presented at the same time. Segmenting is the idea of actually streamlining the learning for the students through our own understanding of the topic. All we're doing here is we're dividing the miasma of information into more manageable chunks. The students are then able to look at it, break it down, draw those connections, and by chunking the information together, they can actually draw links and work on a top-down processing method that allows them to memorize larger amounts of information in a more simpler way. Pre-training does not mean to teach them before they learn. It simply means giving them a key to be able to access more learning when they're in our sessions. So it doesn't mean give them all of the workbooks before we look at the workbooks. It certainly doesn't mean tell them what you're going to learn so they can learn it before they come to class. All it means is providing them with a little bit of information that allows them to access the further learning that you'll provide in class. This could just be a list of keywords and their meanings, but that would allow them to understand it when you yourself talk about it or you present them with certain things in your sessions. And modality is the idea that people learn better actually from words when they are presented as narration rather than on-screen text. It's the main inspiration behind how I've done this PowerPoint presentation myself and why I avoid text whenever possible. If I'm talking, you don't want to be reading. You want to look at an image because you can look at an image and listen to me talk at the same time. That's absolutely fine. So let's do away with the text and focus on the two stimuli that we know that work together. We've got the visual and we've got the auditory processing that can work together. In a similar vein, we actually want to avoid using simple singular stimuli. So I've gone for the example here of just loads of text. If you hand a student a page full of text explaining something, their learning that takes place there isn't going to be as good as if you provide the information in a multimedia approach. So if you can give them a visual piece of data or information as well as some text, or perhaps as well as your own narration itself, that is far better than giving them just a load of text. Another example here is don't ever stand at the front of a class and just talk and rely on them looking at you to remember, because that isn't multimedia. That is just you using your voice. So make sure you have got some visual stimulation for the students to actually use as anchor points to what you're talking about. We also have personalization. Now, this is one of the biggest switch offs for students from my own experiences. If I put a body of information that is too formal, and this happens a lot, especially if you use a serif font, a lot of text can switch people off immediately. So to make it a little bit more personal and accessible, we want to minimize the amount of text, really, not delete it completely, just minimize it and use more visual aids as well as our own, obviously, auditory discussion with students to allow them to access that learning. In a similar vein, you want to avoid voice recordings wherever possible, especially the robot voice style things. If you are going to have discussion or auditory narration to a topic, then ideally you want to do it yourself. You want to be there in the room going through it. You obviously, in situations like what we have here, you can't always be there to do so, but at least when you are doing that, try to have your own voice in the recording rather than a generic robot one. And finally, just sort of in that vein, you actually don't need to have this. You don't need a picture of yourself or the little bubble in the corner to show that you're there and talking. Now, there isn't actually any proof to say that that aids in learning. All it does is it provides a distraction. So we're going to get rid of that. And what we're going to do is we're just going to focus on keeping the imagery that is relevant to the discussion on the page or on the screen at any given point. These are the 12 principles. I've gone through that nice and thoroughly, but also quickly. And if you want to know any more information, you can get hold of us on any of these channels here. Thank you very much for watching. See you later.